Hello, Romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. We're at episode 78, and on today's episode, I speak with award-winning author and podcast co-host Emily Roberson about optioning your book for film or TV, the challenging parts of translating a story for the screen, and how the 3-act structure can be a good starting point to get the bones of a script down. Emily is also the co-host of the Time to Write podcast with Amy Kelly, where they also talk about writing as authors, and they have a lot of experience in drilling down to a good story. There's even brief mention of screenwriting outside the box and how fictional podcasts are now being optioned for film or series. One example that I enjoyed was Archive 81 from Netflix. Highly recommend if you haven't seen it. We also chatted some of the more puzzle-like challenges of writing a screenplay, especially when constantly switching from high-level view, as in, this is my midpoint, to the narrow view of, does this scene work? I may sound a little different in this episode because I have less of my podcast voice and am just passionate to chat about screenwriting and filmmaking. As mentioned in the previous episode, this is a big passion of mine, and I tried to make this a bit of a companion piece with a filmmaking episode with Tosca Musk. If you haven't checked that out, it's interesting to see perspective from both the director and producer versus the screenwriter. Most importantly, like Emily stated, productions are a collaborative effort and take a lot of people to create one series or feature. Links to connect to Emily, along with other media mentions in the episode, will be listed in the description. I do use some Amazon affiliate links, so if you buy through the link, it helps the podcast and is always appreciated. There's no Sarah Stories segment in this episode, but if you enjoyed my chat with Emily, feel free to check out some of the other episodes from Romancing the Story, which focuses primarily on storytelling and story structure. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, author and podcast host, Emily Roberson. Hey!
Hi.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk to you today about some of the script writing stuff. But before we jump into all that, in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Sure. So I'm Emily Roberson. I am from Arkansas. I write, as she said, screenplays and fiction and a little bit of nonfiction. I have a book that came out in 2019. Wait, I have it here. It's a retelling of a Greek myth with a reality TV setting called Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters. And that came out with a traditional publisher in 2019. And then I self-published another book that is around here somewhere. This one, a few years before that, called Life, Motherhood, and the Pursuit of the Perfect Handbag. That's really light women's fiction. So those are, I kind of write all over the map. And then lately I've been doing a lot of screenwriting.
Well, yes, I know that I had talked to Amy Kelly, your other co-host, right?
My co-host, yes.
Yes, of Time to Write podcast. Anyone who's interested in that. If you're interested in this podcast, you'd probably like that one as well. So, and Amy Kelly also happens to own Lone Star Literary Life.
Literary Life, yes.
Yeah. And so she's doing all the things at the moment. And then we were talking about all the bookish stuff. And I remember I was telling her, well, I like to do filmmaking too. And she kind of in turn told me that about your endeavors, writing and pitching your books.
Yes.
As far as writing the script and trying to get it to networks and see if it can really get done. So most authors only dream of getting any kind of movie deal or really the book made into a script. How did you settle on the idea to start doing it yourself?
So back when my book came out in 2018, when Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters came out in 2018, 2019, I felt so sure that it was something that would really work for film and TV. Like it's got an expansive world. It's got characters that are compelling, but you could totally see it working as a TV show. And back when it first came out, it actually did. So I do have a literary agent. So that it was traditionally published, and my literary agent did take it around a little bit in LA. And it got a little bit of interest, but people were like, oh, we have this going on or we have that going on. And so after, so it didn't get picked up. Nobody was, it didn't sell an option should I explain to your audience what an option is and how it works?
I don't think it would hurt because Tosca Musk had mentioned it, and I'm just like, I'm not sure if some of my audience knows quite what that is. So,
right. So the idea is, okay, so I have this book. I own the rights to everything except for, like, Macmillan bought the rights to world English. So publications of my book in English run through Macmillan. I was able to sell the rights in French. So there's the French edition.
Oh, hey. Yeah.
My agent sold it. It also recently came out in Turkish, I just found out, which is super exciting.
Nice.
But the other rights that I retained and that my agent will help with are the film and TV rights, the video game rights. If there was ever a board game based on it, I own those rights. But then it's up to me to sell them. Of course, individual people, unless you're a billionaire, do not have the ability to make film and TV shows on your own. It's just, it's too time consuming. It's too expensive. So what happens is a production company will sort of buy your book, but they're not buying, most of the time, they're not actually wholeheartedly buying the rights. What they're buying is what's called an option. So they're paying you to say, no one but me. So let's say I'm a production company. Let's imagine I'm a production company. You have a book. I would love to make it into a show. I come to you and say, I would really like to pursue the possibility of making your book into a show. And you say, because we are all business people as well as authors, yes, that sounds delightful. How much will you pay me for my option? Because that is super important, because in this business, you show that you value your work by the fact that you let people pay you for it. So you say, oh, that sounds amazing. What are the terms that you would like for the option? So that means, the option means, for the amount of time that you sign on to, no one else can try to make this into a show. So they pay you for the right to say that they are going to try to make it into a movie or a show for an amount of time, which is why the option's important. So let's say they say, this is going to be expensive. I need it for 5 years. Then I say, you need to pay me a lot of money. Because 5 years is a long time to be out. Now, what if they say, well, I don't have a lot of money? Then you say, okay, we'll do an option for less money for 3 months or 6 months or a year. It just means that for that period of time, no one else could make something out of your show. So when people say my option lapsed and nothing got made, you still did get paid just for the right to have them hold on to your property. It's like you're renting it to them.
Mm-hmm.
You're renting it to them for the term, the amount of time that they set.
Right. And whatever they do with it in that period of time is kind of, whether they make it or not, is kind of up to them.
Up to them. Right. And so for me, and a lot of authors are very happy with that. They take the money and they move on. For me, I, like, from what it sounds like for you, I've always really loved film and TV. I've always loved the idea of writing in that medium. And so for me, it actually was kind of a cool opportunity, because normally, if you're a novelist, if your thing gets bought, you're not going to be involved with making it. Like, you're not. You don't understand the industry. You don't even know how to write scripts yet. Like, they might hire you in like a consulting role, or they might and this is all negotiated in your contract. This is all needs to be in the contract. Because if they say, we're going to do this and this and this, and it's not on paper, it needs to be on paper. It needs to be. And so when they say, you could end up being able to visit the set one time, but not having any role in your thing being made. And people have had that happen all the time. Like, yeah, it's got my name on it, but it doesn't have anything to do with me because they bought it. Once they bought it, they can do whatever they want with it. They bought it. They paid you for it. It's like if I buy your house and you move out, I can tear it down. And so the same thing happens. And oftentimes that's okay because they know way more than you do. It's like the whole thing, the trade-off that we make when we publish our work. Like we let a cover designer design it because I'm not a designer. Like, but for me, I wanted to be more involved with the process. So I decided that the best way to do that was to pivot to actually writing a pilot. So that's a first episode of television based on my script, based on my book.
I know a little bit about options, not a whole lot, but here's the thing. I wanted this as a companion piece to Tosca's talk, and she had ended the episode like that. She says she has a whole, she calls it a master plan, fingers crossed, for the next 10 years, because that's what she was talking about, the options lapsing. And that she had to make them within a certain amount of time, and she has to show investors that. So that's what she does. She tracks all these movies of when they're going to get made.
And here's the crucial thing. Let's say you want to start screenwriting. Let's imagine you want to start screenwriting. And you're like, I read this book and I love it. And I think it would make a great movie or show. You have to go get the option from that. You need to call the author or their agent or whoever to say, I need an option on your work. Because if you write a screenplay based on something you don't have an option to do, you can't do anything. You don't own it unless it's in the public domain. You can write one on David Copperfield or something. But like if there's another author's work, now your own work, you can totally do, because unless you signed, let's imagine you got in with like a Crooked or some of those publishers that are super shady. If they bought your film rights from you, you can't do it.
Exactly.
So don't sell your film rights if you ever want to do this.
Yeah, hold on to them. Make sure you hold on to them.
Hold on to whatever. I always say, hold on to whatever rights you can hold on to.
Right. And you can have different approaches. Like that's something you mentioned as well. You can take the Anne Rice approach, where it's just like, go with God, my child, and you just, good luck.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
And I know people who are authors who were like, they have no interest in screenwriting. They have no interest in being on set. They have no interest in which case, take the bucket of money that they gave you and roll on. Like that's
keep going.
Totally fine. Or the small amount of money, because that is also, sometimes that happens, just it's all whether or not it fits in with your plan. That's the
right. And it does take a lot of time and a lot of effort. Like, I mean, you can also take the approach of the other side of that is Diana Gabaldon, who it has a very big hand in the Outlander series. So that is something that, it depends on how you negotiate, like you said, in the contract, and how much you really want to be involved.
Or you can see what's happened with Rick Riordan, which is both paths. Because on the original Percy Jackson movies, he just sold them. Like they were they sold before he was as big as he is now. And then they aged the characters up. They did some things that like the fan base is really not on board with. Well, I mean, and that's being a huge author. Now he's super involved with the Disney Plus series, like super involved in it. So he's kind of shown like both paths. So the same property with two different versions, two different, the TV show is much truer to it's literally is the books, whereas the movies were played in the sandbox a little more, which also, just as a side note, if you're thinking about writing something, turning a whole novel into a script for what people I have now learned to call a feature, which is a movie, what the rest of us would call a movie. But if you're trying to take a whole novel and turn it into a feature film, a movie, you're going to lose a bunch of stuff by necessity, because a feature film is 90 pages long. A novel is a really, your best case is like 90 to 100 pages, and there's way more white space on the stage. You just cannot squeeze everything from a novel into a feature film. You're going to have to leave something out.
And that is something actually I talked with Tosca from Passion Flicks about, because that's something unique to her process is she has the authors very involved, and she does consult with them a lot about what should stay, what should go. And that's something kind of like script writing 101, in case anyone wants to know, is like usually a page is worth a minute in
Right.
film. So you have to think of it that way. And when you have like, how long would you say your book is?
It is 337 pages.
So that would be, oh yeah. So that would be a long,
There's no way you save pages of description from like, one shot that, that saying a picture's worth 1,000 words, like it kind of is true. Like you can kind of like, if you have an image, you can get something much clearer than if you had to write it all out. But
well, and that's kind of what I wanted. That was one of my other kind of questions I wanted to ask, was because I know what struck me about your story in particular is that you really have made the time and the effort to really learn about screenplay writing. And it sounds like you've done your homework. And, they're two very different mediums. What you're kind of showing on screen, it's visual storytelling, right? Versus what is in a book. So where you have like more internal dialogue, you have more of the thought processes, and you can really get into very detailed things. What's some of the main differences you found between writing a book and writing a script? And I know you've kind of mentioned some of them already.
That you just nailed is the big, you literally, unless you use voiceover, which is, you just have to use so sparingly. Like voiceover is like, that flavor of licorice. It's so strong. Like if you put it
The
in
black
anything,
one, yes.
like all you can taste is licorice. Voiceover's like that. Like you just have to use the tiniest amount. Like I was even looking at like, there's some world explaining that I have to do. Cause like the thing about my world is it's a Greek mythological world, but it's a hyper modern setting. So the characters from mythology are there. It's not one of those worlds where it's like a secret world or it's our world, but no. It's like the characters are from mythology. They are there and it's hyper modern. There's a little bit of explaining to do. So I sat down and watched, and this is part of the learning process, like probably 20 like fantasy shows on Netflix or on, just because I'm looking at TV on a million places just to see how do they do that? How do they set up the world? And there are a lot of different ways, but very rarely is it someone saying, hey, this is what my life is like.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time. Like generally there's some sequence, mostly visual, to set things up. So I would say the main thing is that everything has to be shown on screen. In a novel, you can have a character say something and think something else. Or that is not a thing you can do in a screenplay unless you have to use what's been fun to me is to see how many other tools you can use. So here, let's give an example. You have a character who is supposed to be happy, but is sad, is saying that she's happy, but she's sad. Now, some of that's going to be the actor's performance because that is part of the skill of actor. That's part of why you have actors, is because they can actually play happy, sad. But then the other way you can do it is with a lot of clues in the environment. Like you have a character who's supposed to be happy, who's saying she's happy, but she's really sad. Show her walking down the street smiling, but there's gray clouds everywhere. Or there's like you can let the environment of the world participate in your storytelling. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes, because that was something that I've also experienced because I've executive produced one of my friends' short films. So
fun.
Very fun. And that's something we actually had a set designer who helped us kind of coordinate everything that went on in set. And in fact, we had little clues and hints in the background that something was amiss, that something wasn't quite right. So.
And that is all one of the coolest things that I've learned is how much of that is in the script. I would say you're starting to think about doing this. The most important thing is read the screenplays of the movies you love. Go and read the screenplays because you will see it's amazing how much of what's on screen is actually on the page.
Yes.
It's already there. It's already cued. And you kind of have to in a way, because one of the biggest things I've learned, and this is a great example, like no movie is made by yourself. Like it's always going to have a team. And so the team has to be on the same page. And so in a way, the screenplay is like the blueprint that tells the whole team, like what's the vibe. Some of the other things you can use is music. Like let's say you're writing a script. And again, we've got our smiling person walking down the street, let's say you say like, Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone is playing. You don't have the rights to that. It's too expensive. You can just sort of say a song like that. Like that's totally acceptable in screenplay format. You could either just say that song is playing, knowing that it won't actually be that song, because there are music supervisors whose whole job is getting the rights to either the song that you want or a song that resembles the song you know, like there's a whole power, but that can be in the screenplay, like the music that's playing. You can put cues to the sound design. So those are some of the tools you can use.
Yes. And I love the idea because that's kind of how I've learned a lot about screenwriting. I've taken some classes too, and I've learned from other friends, but it's just reading the scripts and watching the movies and like really comparing them of like, what actually is like on screen versus like what has been written down. And a lot of it is just taking straight, it's supposed to take straight from the script, but there's a lot of it that makes it on the screen that visually you can see.
Yeah.
So,
well, and one of the other things is and this is another thing you can do. So you can look at, oftentimes you can find earlier drafts and you will see scenes that are not in the movie. Well, they needed to write them to get to where they got, but the actor, it's like this weird thing where sometimes the actor can wordlessly do all the work that was in that whole scene. So you can look and say, oh, we don't actually need the scene. Let's say the character's really missing their mother and you had this whole scene where they're like talking on the phone about how much they miss their mom. You get a great actor. All they need to do is look at a picture of the mother, and the whole experience that's in a scene gets played in that. I mean, it's so crazy when you start to look. It's like a second of running time, or like 15 seconds of run time. So that to me is one of the other really cool things about screenwriting. It's also a lot more, to me, a lot more puzzle-like than novels, because it's so like, for a novel, you could write a 30,000 word novel or 120,000 word. Both can be successful. If somebody gives me a screenplay to read that is 140 pages, I know it doesn't work. Like it doesn't work. You already know it doesn't work. It's too long.
Well, and I love that you have already kind of figured that out. So you've created a pilot. You've already kind of written a pilot because you know it's probably going to be a series or best suited for a series.
Yeah, but I'm still learning, because and also the other thing is the industry shifts a lot. So so something that worked, like, anyway, so it's interesting. So I'm still definitely like, I'm learning a ton and I love it, but I am definitely still in the heavy learning phase.
Well, and something that, I've learned as a screenwriter and, just kind of by way of doing it, making films and things like that, is there's just as much power in omission, kind of like you were saying. Like that was something that I've talked about with acting coaches and even other screenwriters, other filmmakers, is because like, they're like, your imagination can sometimes can fill in the gaps.
Oh, 100%. It's like Jaws.
Exactly. That's what I kind of wrote in our pre-show notes. It was like, just like Jaws, because it was a practical thing, because the shark wasn't really able to do much.
Do people know that? Have you mentioned that before on the podcast? This mechanical shark. And they were supposed to have the shark, and then the mechanical shark did not work well. And so they ended up using that famous dun-dun, dun-dun, the sound. But even here's a great example. This is a great example of something you can do in a screenplay that I literally just heard about this. So imagine you've got somebody that's like, I'm just going to go in the water for a minute and then I'll be back. There's no suspense in that, right? Unless it's Jaws and you just saw the fin in the water, and then you have the mom saying, I'm just going to run in the water for a second. I'll be back. We as an audience are like, oh no. Oh no. So that's even how, like, one of the great examples I've heard about screenwriting, and this is really useful. I think it's useful for novels too, but it's especially useful for screenwriters. Okay. Let's imagine you have a scene. There's a couple at a table and they're arguing. Okay. That's a certain amount of drama in that. Okay. Move them to a restaurant. Okay. They're arguing at the restaurant. There's a certain amount of tension in that. Move them to a restaurant on Valentine's Day. Now we've got a little more tension, because there's a way to behave. You've got the fancy waiter coming and doing the things, and your tension is up because they're trying to now have a whispered argument. Show that there's a shot, that there's a bomb in the bathroom with a timer on it. And then you cut, or there's a bomb under the table. All of a sudden, we as an audience, we're glued. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Just because of that little time bomb. But you can do it in all kinds of ways. Like, let's say they're arguing at the table, but he's secretly been cheating on her and she doesn't know. Show the mistress getting out of the car, coming into the like the second scene gains so much tension. And if you're looking to deliver backstory and information, do it in scenes like that. Do it in scenes where the tension's already built in, because the audience is now glued. We're listening like intently. So you can also explain like geopolitics, nuclear fission, like whatever.
Yeah. I love how you just threw out like Alfred Hitchcock's kind of like
Yes.
lesson behind there, because that builds the tension really quickly, is when you put a limit, like either I'm about to be caught cheating, a bomb's about to go off, or we better do this thing, or something's gonna happen. Something bad's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So,
and what's interesting is you can do it in big ways, but you can also do it in small ways. Like you can add that tension, even just that, like somebody has an allergy, all these ways to subtly add tension that just pulls the audience in. And screenplays like demand it, because they're so like every scene in a screenplay is doing at least 3 or 4 things. Like it has to. It's like you live in a studio apartment. Like everything has to be multi-purpose, because it's carrying so much weight.
it is. And it's carrying a lot of the story. And usually there's like a multifunctionality to everything.
Yeah.
So, because you've probably seen this too. Like sometimes I'll check out series, sometimes on Netflix or Hulu or something. And I feel like I've watched an entire season and I didn't get much out of it. But there's some movies I can see like from back like 20 years ago, from like an hour and a half. And I feel like I've watched an entire series worth, because they packed so much into that little space of time. And they made it, and probably because more, again, pragmatic stuff, because film was more expensive back then. They were doing everything more on the old school stuff instead of digital. So they had to get it more in there in a smaller space of time. So
yeah, you didn't have just the camera running and stuff like that. But
yes.
I would say, as far as I have just listened to a ton of podcasts, I've been to a couple festivals, like, various things like that, and then I've read a lot of screenplays. So just kind of taking in all that information.
Well, and here's another one that I had asked also Tosca, being on the director producer side of things. How do you decide what to cut from the script?
So I have a newer answer to this that has totally changed my whole view, and I find it really useful. So there is a podcast called The Screenwriting Life, which is just a great podcast. And the 2 ladies are on it. There's Meg LeFauve, who wrote Inside Out and Inside Out 2, and then another screenwriter named Lorien McKenna. It's a great podcast. I highly recommend. It's a good writing podcast at Baseline, and they talk to lots of really interesting people in the industry. One of the biggest things they've been talking about is theme. And so if you have there's 2 different, well, no, there's a million different kinds of stories, but there's 2 specific kinds of stories that you will see in screenplays a lot. And one is ones where characters change, and other ones are ones where characters don't. Knives Out, Benoit Blanc, he doesn't really change. Like, he solves the mystery so that the world changes because he solves the mystery and he figures it out, but he's himself. Other movies, the character actually changes. So, but either way, whether it's like the world is getting solved, or if it's a tragedy, the character's not changing, but they're not changing in a tragic way where you're like, no, just don't. And then they do it anyway. You're like, so the idea is your theme really is, so there's this moment at the end of Act 2. So screenplays really rely on 3-act structure. I mean, there's a million, sometimes TV shows will break. It's all still 3-act structure. It's all like you're in a situation, you go in, you get in a new situation at the, there's a midpoint. So at the very end of Act 2, which is the like dark night of the soul, the low point, the decision point, the point where like the characters done everything. They've tried every old way if you have a character that's changing. Like there's a screenwriter named Michael Arndt who's got amazing YouTube content, which I cannot recommend highly enough. He says that's the moment where there's a dark truth at the heart of your story. That's where that dark truth is told. And the character has to face it. Like he did the screenwriting for Toy Story 3. And of course, the dark truth at the heart of all the Toy Story movies is kids grow up.
Mm-hmm.
They leave home. They don't stay childish. That's like the dark truth at the heart. And that's like that moment where the character's just like, oh, it's all true. I've failed. Like and that's one thing is you really just have to take them to the pit, right? They're in the pit. Like I have failed. And then the whole point of the movie is whether it's in like the mentor's voice comes back. Like I was just rewatching Fellowship of the Ring and there's that moment and Frodo's just standing there like, I've failed. And then all of a sudden he's got Gandalf's voice in his head saying, it's not for us to decide the times we live in. It's for us to decide what we will do with those times, right? Like that's the theme of the movie. Like that's the theme. Like Lord of the Rings is like, even the smallest person can make an impact on the world. That is the theme of the movie. So once you know that, then when you're looking at scenes to cut, you say, does this scene tie into my theme? And if the answer is no, even if it's cute, even if it's fun, even if it makes the whole test audience fall out laughing, unless you can find a way to pull that content to where it does actually tie in with your theme, it doesn't belong in the movie because audiences get very confused.
Yes.
It's very, have you ever had a movie where you're like, get it? Like, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. It's because it didn't know what its theme was. It didn't pull you along in that way, or you just didn't get it because it wasn't your thing. But for us as screenwriters to know, like, what is my theme? Which a lot of times you don't know until you have a first draft. You like write a first draft and then you figure out your theme. But once you know what your theme is, you say, and your theme could be like, it can't just be like brothers. It tends to be like when brothers disagree or, like, how do I still love my brother even though we're really different? Like, or something like that. And then you start to be able to say like I heard this fascinating interview with Peter Jackson talking about the Lord of the Rings. And originally they had a really different end for Return of the King. They shot Aragorn actually fighting Sauron. This is super deep nerd stuff, but to me, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
They shot Aragorn fighting Sauron. And then they're like, wait a minute, it doesn't work. Like this is Peter Jackson talking about. They're like, wait, the whole point of the movie is that Frodo's the only person who can do this. And B, that hobbits are the people. So the small people, the people like the powerful can't solve this problem. It's hobbits and Gollum and that like, and so they were like, oh, wait, like that doesn't work at all because that's not Aragorn's hero. Aragorn's hero's journey is about becoming the person who can let other people becoming the kind of leader who doesn't need to do everything himself, becoming the kind of leader who can let other people do their task and do his task, right? So if all of a sudden he's fighting Sauron, you're like, wait, why didn't he fight Sauron? If he could fight Sauron, why do we even do this? Like,
no, that's a great point. I didn't even know that they had shot another ending, but yeah, that would have totally taken Aragorn away from his like birthright of that was his whole journey was like struggling with that, like becoming who he was meant to be this whole time.
Who he was meant to be. Yes, he took away Isildur's mistake. This is super nerdy, guys. But by doing it, he did that by not taking the ring, by not saying,
yes.
I mean, it's like the thing about Aragorn as a leader is like, he's like the opposite. Even if you look at this is Aragorn's journey as a leader, and this is Aragorn stepping into his power, which is definitely 100% one of the big themes of that saga. But him stepping into his power, he does not become the person who says, I alone can do this. That's not who he becomes. He becomes a leader that says, you can do this. And I see that you can do this. And I support you in doing that. Like he has a power that is generated by not having control. Because another big theme of all of that is like, what happens when you become so fixated on power and control that you can't let other people have free will, that you can't let other people make their own choices. And like that, so thematically you can see where, oh, the whole thing, it wouldn't have worked if all of a sudden he's fighting Sauron. You're like, what? I don't understand, which they realized, which is why when you watch the Return of the King, he's fighting this giant troll at the end. You're like, why is he fighting this giant troll? It's because they replaced him digitally with somebody.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And it's one of those things too. We talk about script being coded in something, because I always saw the hobbits as coded as like pure good. Like the way that they operate, the way they talk to each other, the way that they're just their view of life. It's like, what do like, well, where's, second breakfast and lunch,
Right,
and lunch
exactly.
and like all afternoon tea. And like they start listing off all the foods, it's just like nothing bad has touched them, and they are the pure innocence. And where Sauron is on the direct opposite side of like pure evil. So like you have these two opposing sides who have to kind of face off, quote unquote. And like when you have that moment of real pure good, the best of us all be corrupted.
Yeah.
That the whole coding of that is very important too. If you're looking at a character as like you're trying to say they're pure good without outright saying they're pure good.
Right.
By the way.
And there's lots of, and the thing that's so fun to me about the screenwriting piece, and this is, so novels, you do this too, to some extent,
of
just
course.
setting and how characters talk to each other and all those things. But in answer to the big question is when to know what to take out is, does it tie to theme? The other thing, and this is one of the newest things, but I am really sitting with it, is, did I do this chain before? Because an actor does not want to play the same scene again and again. Yes. So let's say I've got a character, I'm trying to show that she is not assertive. Mm-hmm. If I've written 6 scenes where she's like not assertive at the grocery store, not assertive at work, not assertive here, and they are the same, they're functionally the same action, even though in real life, people do that all the time. Mm-hmm. This is where I need a montage. This is where I need to montage. If I really want to show she is not assertive in all these different places, I show one sequence of her not being assertive, and then I can do a montage of her looking downtrodden. That whole thing needs to take like 3 or 4 minutes, because now I need her to do something different. I need her. And the other thing, this is like literally, I may say many things are the most important thing. This is the most important thing. Characters in screenplays must have a tangible goal. They must have a goal you can say out loud, and not a goal like, I want to feel better about myself. It needs to be like, I want to get promoted. Underlying that is, because once I get promoted, I will feel better about myself. But like, they need a goal that can be acted. Like, I'm going to go and do the thing. Like,
or a lot of times what happens is what they have the MacGuffin, what they call the MacGuffin in a movie, is where like, I got to get this thing. Indiana Jones always has a MacGuffin. I need to get a relic. Yes. I need to get the relic. So, and
and then we as screenwriters, what we're doing is complicating that. Like, either they get it and it's not really what they wanted, or they get it and someone takes it from them. All of those things happen. But like, your character has to be like on the Screenwriting Life. And I wish I could remember who said this, but I love it. I'm totally using it all the time now. A protagonist in a movie is a character who is 100% committed to a terrible goal.
Ooh, I like it.
Like if it was a good, reasonable goal that made sense, they would not be the protagonist of a movie. They would be the wise mentor figure that's helping the protagonist of the movie. Like at this phase that the story, and the big question is, and when you're trying to figure out where to start your movie, once you've identified, you would say, I know this is a story about a guy solving a mystery, or this is a story about what wealth does to people, or pick a thing. When you decide where to start, which you'll draft a lot before you get there, but when you really decide, like, when do you start shooting film, it needs to be like 2 minutes before the thing changed that made everything different for your person.
Mm-hmm.
Like today, why today? You don't need to show their whole growing up. You don't need to show, it needs to start like today is the day that everything changes, because otherwise we just get bored.
Well, and we always know, like, there's so many, like, if you watch some of your favorite movies, you're going to notice an establishing shot, right? That opening of the movie that just immediately sets you in. We know the stakes. We kind of get the vibe of the character. We may not know fully who they are yet, but we kind of understand
Right.
kind of what they're about. And like you kind of understand what the genre and or vibe of the movie is going to be.
Right.
So that's kind
From
of
the,
what
from the jump. Yeah.
From the beginning. So that's a super important thing. I can never press upon people enough, especially when you're writing a script, that opening scene can really set the tone for the rest of the movie.
And I will say, this is the other big thing they talk about in the screenwriting life all the time. And this was incredibly useful to me because they have interviewed so many people that are so successful. They're like, you're going to write 20 drafts. You're going to write 20 drafts, 30 drafts of this thing. So if you're listening to this and you just are like, oh, I want to start adapting my work today, you don't need to worry about which is the opening scene. Just get the bones down. But like once you have the bones down, the thing about screenwriting is it's constantly 10,000 script view, narrow view. You're constantly going all the way up. What's my midpoint? Back down. Does the scene work? All the way up. What's my end of act 2? Back down. Does the scene work? Like, what would an actor say? If they were looking at the scene, what would an actor say? Read it out loud. Read it with your friends. Have your computer read it to you. Like, which for people who don't know, if you have a Mac, you can hit Option Escape once you've highlighted text and it'll read it to you.
Well, and something you're kind of mentioning too, like earlier and kind of now is like the 3-act structure. Something I learned actually that was very helpful to me. If you're just getting down the bones, try to figure out where those points are in your movie, kind of build around them, like almost like a foundation.
The other piece I would say that's been such a growth area for me, that's been really great, that I know I will bring back to novels, is number one, screenwriting is so collaborative, and you have a completely different, like, how in bookish spaces, people are often like, don't read the reviews, don't tag me in negative reviews, all that stuff, which I totally understand. I have had all the feelings about stumbling on a negative review and going into like a little bad feeling place. We've all done that. But the thing about it is that if you are going to sell your project, which we should probably talk about that phase, if you are going to sell your project, you are going to have meetings with people where they're like, I don't get it.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't get it. And it is your job to be like, either, like, I just recently had this amazing experience. I went to this retreat called Cinestory in Northern California, not Northern California, Southern California in the mountains. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Incredible nonprofit organization. It was absolutely amazing. I learned so much. But one of the things we did was this thing called Fly on the Wall, where I sat in front of there were 40 writers there. There were 40 mentors, and all the mentors are currently working in film and TV.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was awesome. So I'm sitting across from 3 mentors. All 3, none of them are going to buy it, but they're all 3 like working in the industry. And so what they do is they have you do like a 5-minute pitch of your project, which is just you saying like, retelling of a Greek myth with a reality TV setting. And this is my character. And I, done all this prep work. They can ask you some questions. So you get like 2 minutes and they ask questions. Well, then you pretend you leave and like call it Fly on the Wall, because you get to hear what they say.
That is super valuable. Yes.
And so one person, after hearing my pitch, said, I love it, but I think it's really expensive. The second person said, I don't get it. I just don't get it. He's like, reality TV, the present, mythology, like, I don't understand. Like, he was just totally stuck. And the third woman said, I don't think with the volume it's that expensive, which is a new filmmaking technology that people can look up the volume. It's very cool. So he said, I don't even think it's that expensive. I would watch that tomorrow. The most important thing for us as screenwriters is, let's say you were in meetings, person number 3 is the only one you need to worry about. The person that says, I love that, I would buy that, I would watch that tomorrow. I don't need to worry that guy number 2 doesn't get it. I don't need to go back and explain it. If the person who is the target audience for it gets it and is like, I love that, that's all you need.
Mhm.
You just need one person with money. But do you see what I'm saying? Like I don't have to go home and think, oh my gosh, how I'm going to switch my pitch to address someone who just doesn't get the premise. No, if you don't get the premise, it's just not for you. Like it's for someone else. Like nothing's for everyone.
Well, exactly. And it shouldn't be either, because if it's for everyone, that's for nobody.
Yeah.
So it's nobody's really going to enjoy it.
I don't watch Westerns. So I don't get it. You know what? So I think that piece, but to be able to, and this is a part where like the more, and this gets a little, Amy and I talk about this all the time, like personal development, the personal development piece, that's a huge part of what we talk about in Time to Write. To get to the place where you can have someone say, I don't get it.
Yeah.
And be okay.
That's okay.
And not get super defensive and weird, which I have certainly done in my life. In that situation, to be able to be like, does this person not getting it mean there's possible I didn't explain it well enough, and then I can revisit that and really work on it. But it's possible they just don't get it because it's not for them, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If that's not your target audience, like say your target audience is a teenage girl and a crusty old man just says, I don't get it. That's okay. It's not for him.
That's okay. Is there a teenage girl around?
Yes. Or someone who was a teenage girl once and understands.
So I think that's where, for me, that has been one of the most fun parts of sort of pivoting into this and being with people. And you do have to watch. I mean, there's the same as, it's human life. There are some people who are going to be like, say something mean, say something that's like supposed to be critical, but it's really just mean, and they're just trying to cut you down. Yeah. That's also but this is all like, you're navigating things. Like, I'm proud of my project. Does that mean that the screenplay is perfect? No, it does not. But if their critique is, I hate it, then I'm like, well, I don't actually need to have many more conversations about that. No. But if their critique is that the Act 2 break doesn't work, that's really important. Like, I just learned something really interesting at Cinestory. They said, you want to you want to know how to double the price of your project? Write exterior night at the beginning of a scene. If you could make it to the daytime, make it to the daytime. If you can make it inside, make it inside. Because I mean, if you just think about the logistics of it, all of a sudden, exterior night, rain. So those are the kind of things that I feel like I'm still really learning. And so here's the important thing. The place that I'm at right now is I'm writing other I have the finished screenplay of Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters. I'm writing other screenplays because I would really like to get a manager. Okay. That is currently the main path because I think it sounds really fun to get staffed on a show. I think which would mean actually working on a TV show with other writers because I love collaborating. I think it sounds really fun to write a feature film that gets made. Yeah. I think it sounds really fun to write IP, like if Disney was like, hey, we really need a female writer on a new Star Wars show, please me, so those kinds of things and all those run through. It's like, it is a little bit like on the book side. Like if you want to be traditionally published, you probably need an agent. If you want to there's a level of work, you probably just need a manager. So that's kind of where I am on the.
So like there's a fine process and kind of what path you want to take, right? To getting to hopefully get to your screenwriting, either your stuff and or other stuff to kind of practice, right? I think that's a great way to practice.
Your path, from the number of people I have talked to, your path of going ahead and just making stuff is also, people skip a lot of steps because they start making stuff and then they get, the more stuff you make, you will get better. It's naturally part. I mean, not you. I mean, you like the audience, like,
oh yeah, of course.
People will absolutely get better. And so one of the things that Amy, Kelly, and I went to the podcast movement convention in Los Angeles last spring. And when we were there was a huge amount of talk about fiction podcasts being made, selling as IP and getting made. So that's another possibility. So
Yes, it is. I believe Netflix had come out with a show. I will pop it in the beginning of this episode. I forgot what it was called, but it was a really good show. It was actually really good. I don't think they've come out with a second season. I don't know if they plan to, but it was really good. And it was originally a podcast and I had no clue. So yes, there are many paths. There's no linear way to get there as a screenwriter. Sometimes just doing the thing is a big way to learn. It's a fast way to learn, just like writing. So
yeah, just jump in.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh my gosh. Emily, we've talked so much about all this awesome stuff. So like all the screenwriting. So where can listeners find your books and how can they connect with you?
Okay. So there's a few different places.
Okay.
Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters is, as they say, available where books are sold. You can order it from Barnes and Noble or whatever. It has an amazing audiobook. If you're like audiobook listener, like I just absolutely love the characters don't sound like me. They have kind of like they're reality stars. So they have a little, and the narrator, they got absolutely nailed that like California kind of affect, which I just absolutely loved. I thought she did such a good job. So that's for Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters. For Life, Motherhood, and the Pursuit of the Perfect Handbag, it is available on Amazon as an ebook, and you can get an ebook for Lifestyles also as an ebook and a paperback. And I'm hoping to I'm planning to reissue that this year or next year and have an audiobook and stuff, but that's kind of on hold. And then not on hold, just slow. Everything's slow. The problem when you do a bunch of different things, the podcasting, the screenwriting, it's like you still do everything. Everything moves a little slower. It's like triathletes may not run the mile quite as fast as people who are just milers. So things move a little slower, but they're still moving. And my website is emilyrobersonbooks.com. And you can go there and find me on social media and join my newsletter and all the normal writer things. But
thanks so much to Emily for joining the show. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're the first to hear new episodes when they drop. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave a review. It helps support the show and allows more opportunity to bring in all kinds of fantastic guests. There's also a link to the YouTube channel in the description if you'd like to see the interviews with some of the guests and see them show off their lovely books. As always, stay safe, be well, and keep writing. Bye!